Alrighty. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liza Convoy. I'm the Business Engagement Manager for the Kent Chamber of Commerce. This is a copyrighted workshop presented by the Small Business Center at Green River College via the Kent Chamber of Commerce. Let's see here, I have a typo. This workshop is not to be retransmitted or reproduced in any form without the expressed written consent of the Chamber. As a chamber member, you also have the opportunity, just like this, to host a workshop to showcase your expertise and also educating our community and our members. Just want to say a quick thank you to all of our investors, our gold investors being Boeing and the Seattle Thunderbirds, the Silver investors, the Kent Covington Reporter, Salem Media, I Love Kent, the Tacoma Rainiers, and the City of Kent. And then our bronze investors, Ajax, Cadence Living, Usernio Sausage, Amazon, Sound Transit, Oberto, Port of Seattle, PSE, Valley Medical Center, Growing Boy Media, Crane Photography, and of course, Green River College. And lastly, a big thank you to our copper level investors for their additional investment in the chamber as well. So with that, I'm joined by Kevin Grossman today, a certified business advisor with the Small Business Center at Green River College, who will be talking about some real estate matters for small businesses today. So with that intro, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kevin.
Well, hi, Liza, thanks for that introduction. And it's nice to hear all the list of supporters. The Kent Chamber does great stuff, and it's nice to see all the businesses supporting the Chamber. Thank you all for being here. I'm sharing information that I know only comes up for you occasionally, since most leases are 3 to 5 years. So I appreciate you being here, and hopefully this information will be good, whether you're renewing or looking at new leases, or maybe you haven't leased space yet, but you're looking at it. I'm available if you've got something to jot notes on. I'll take questions, and I'm available for follow-up on any of the stuff that you go, that was great, but you went too fast, or I would like more detail, or whatever. So I'm available to do that. I want to first thank the Kent Chamber for providing this opportunity to share the information. I always like to share information. I've been in the commercial brokerage world before I joined the Green River Small Business Center for many years, and seeing a lot of transactions that really helped propel businesses forward, and seeing some transactions that caused them a lot of heartburn. And so my hope is that the information that I share with you today will help keep you on the propelling you forward side of that equation. I've represented a lot of businesses over the years, not too much retail, but a lot of office, a lot of industrial, some manufacturing, some software companies, flex tech. But the process is pretty much the same, regardless of the kind of business that you've got, and we'll go through that in the following slides. I work with the Green River Small Business Center, and we are a part of the college. We're funded by the SBA with local match money, including the City of Kent, and that allows Taryn Hornby and I to help small businesses in our catchment area, the Green River College area, at no cost. So it's actually a great job because we get to help you, and I don't have to send you a bill afterwards. So we help people on all sorts of stuff: finance, marketing, HR issues, operations issues. And it's not that we're smart enough to know all that stuff. It's that there's a network of us around the state that we can draw on. So if you have questions that are in particular areas that are outside of my expertise, then I'll set up a co-advising call with somebody that's got the expertise that you need for any particular problem. Let's see. So the reason leases are critical is that it's one of the biggest, it's not, a lot of people say, well, leases, they're only like 5 to maybe 10% of my operating costs, so why should I stress over it that much? And it's like, well, yeah, that's true, but it's a fixed cost, and you can't, and it's not, it doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room. So it ends up being a very important part of your operating cost. And if you ever have hiccups, or if you're stuck in your space, or things like that, then all of a sudden you realize that it takes on way more importance than the percentage of operating costs that it started with. So the way I encourage people to think about this process is as a process. Um, Starting with what do you need? What does your business need to be successful? Um, so clarifying your needs. What do you need now? And because most leases are going, 3 to 5 to 10 years out in the future, think about how you anticipate or want your business to grow, or change, or and so kind of putting that information together. Once you have a good handle on that, then you're in a good position to go identify, well, what are my options? Maybe I stay put, maybe I can expand in the building I'm in, maybe there's other options that are better fit. And then with that criteria that you developed on the first step, you can assess those different options. Are they a good fit? Is it, how does it work for me financially? How does it work for me, um, from any number of different criteria that you might have for the space that you're leasing? Then now you've got options, you've got your criteria. Now you get to negotiate. Like, how do I get the best deal possible given the market conditions right now? And there's a lot of moving parts, and depending on your needs, they can get quite complex. If you're a manufacturer or a restaurant and you need a whole bunch of improvements to the building, you got to tread carefully because there's a lot of moving parts that need to be put together well so that you don't end up unexpectedly owing a bunch of money or having a delayed start or any number of other bad things. So then when you're done with the negotiations, you got to make sure the lease document itself actually reflects what you believe you agreed to, and to understand the stuff in the document. There's just a lot of items in there. Probably the most important one that people sometimes don't realize is that the vast majority of leases you're personally signed on. So it may say your business name on the top of the front page, but when it comes to the signature page, either you're going to be signing personally or you're going to have a lease guarantee behind the lease. And so just be aware that, that lease commitment, 9 times out of 10 in today's market, you're going to be on the hook, just like you would, just like most small businesses. If you have a credit line, you're usually on the hook personally. Same thing with the lease. Then you get to move, of course, and I encourage you to celebrate. So with that, let's dive into more details on the process. So thinking about what you need, size is obviously important. If you don't have room for your people, where are they going to work? If you're a distributor, your business is awfully directly tied to the amount of space that you have for shipping and receiving and storage. If you're an insurance agency, and well, actually, in today's world, the last couple of years have really changed how people think about their space too. There's so much remote work. I mean, I have a great office and a great conference room at Kent Station, but for the last 2 years, everybody I've been dealing with has been like this. So I think people are rethinking what size means to them as far as their space. And so if you have a lease coming up, or you're thinking about leasing space, really give that some thought. What do you need? Um, who needs to be in the office? Who can work remote? Who can work hybrid? I know a lot of companies are going to an approach where they want everybody in the office 1 or 2 days a week because there is some value in the social side of the office and the informal information exchange that goes on in an office environment. But the other 3 or 4 days a week, work from home if you want, come into the office if you want, whatever you want to do. That seems to be what I'm hearing the most of, but you all may have novel and different ideas that I haven't heard of yet. What type of space do you need? Obviously, office space is a lot different than industrial space or retail space. If your business is shifting or moving around, it's helpful to think about that ahead of time, to know, what the configuration needs to be, to really accommodate. Some spaces don't really allow for a lot of change. If you're establishing a restaurant, it can cost an awful lot of money to get a kitchen in there and get a restaurant all outfitted. And typically, that's kind of a static thing once you get up and running. So you want to really think about what you're doing because you're probably going to be living with that configuration for a long period of time. Medical space, it tends to be specialized, tends to have extra plumbing, tends to have extra ventilation, tends to need more parking. So, really be cognizant of the type of space that you need, the type of building that you need, because that's really going to narrow down what provides a good alternative for you. Location, the kind of the old joke of location, 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 right? It's really true for some businesses. Some businesses have a lot of flexibility, so you should be aware how critical it is for you. Um, could be related to your staff. If any of them are taking the bus, is it close to a bus or the sounder or the link or whatever? If everybody drives, is there enough parking? Um, and is it convenient to get to? If you're in a business that has a lot of deliveries or shipping, how are you related to the distribution centers? Those kinds of things. Retailers, I think, are intuitively aware that location is important because retail is so location sensitive, right? How many people are driving by and seeing you every day? Is it the kind of location that's going to um, be easy for your customers to get in and out of? But I think even office users are pretty sensitive to the location from the standpoint that the location, like if I'm a manufacturer and I do work for Boeing, I'm not going to locate in, you know, central Washington because I'm not close to anything that Boeing does. Boeing's probably a bad example since they've been scaling back so much the last couple of years, but you get the point. The other thing is the real estate that you're in often affects your branding and your marketing. So how do your customers perceive it? If you're a high-end financial planner and you're in a Quonset hut, people just aren't going to get it. They're just going to go, what? It's going to be a disconnect. They're not going to trust you with their money. Likewise, if you're somebody who's basically pitching your services as, scrappy and practical and pragmatic, and you're in, the 30th floor of a downtown office building, people are going to scratch their head and go, this doesn't make sense. So, think about how the space works for you, not just from a functional operational standpoint, but also from a market perception standpoint. Basically put yourself in your customer's shoes. Some people have businesses where the customers don't come to them, so obviously you don't have to worry about that as much. But although even in that case, the customers are probably going to see images of where you work. And this last one is last because it's really, really, really important. Timing. So, a lot of times you'll have a 3 to 5 year lease. Oftentimes the lease will say, well, if you give us 6 months notice, you have the right to extend. The problem with that is that 6 months depends on your space, but a lot of times 6 months isn't enough time because you really got to think about um, all the pieces that go into this. And we're going to go into a lot more detail on the pieces down the road. The other timing issues are if you're thinking about where your business is going to grow 3 to 5 to 10 years out, and you've got a wide range of possibilities of where the businesses could be, you might want to consider whether you have expansion options or even the ability to shed space, and what those deadlines are for doing that, which is more complex than most businesses need. But if you're in a business that has a high variable on where you might be in 3 to 5 years, then it's worth understanding that those are things you can negotiate. Some brokers will shy away from that because it makes their job harder, but you need to be focused on what you need for your business. That's the important thing, not the convenience of the broker. So what are your options? I always encourage people, frankly, to drive and call on signs as one of your options, because I think having a physical sense, just personally, windshield sense, it gives you a sense of neighborhoods, it gives you a sense of the buildings. Calling the signs on the buildings, gets you some preliminary information on what the different kinds of buildings are going for. And if you call on a sign and the broker that you contact is asking you really good questions about what you need, that's somebody you might want to consider having help you for the whole process. Because what you're looking for, if you want to, now granted, they represent that particular building that you call on, but in general, if they're inquisitive about what your business needs, that's a really good indicator that they actually could could be somebody that could represent you well because they're interested in what you need rather than just pitching, oh, you need our building because of this and this and this. And it's like, okay, so that's part of their job as a listing agent is to try to sell that particular building. But in the bigger picture, they really need to understand what you need because otherwise that might not be the right deal for you. Another option is, in today's world, obviously the web, if you just search office space or retail space or industrial space near me, right, you're going to get some things. There's multiple sites. There's CREXI, there's LoopNet, there's Commercial Brokers Association, and all of those have databases of listed information that the brokers provide to them, and each one of them has a little different mix of the brokerages that participate. If you're a smaller, if you're looking at smaller spaces, and maybe a mom and pop owned building as opposed to an institutional building would work for you, you should also check out Craigslist because they'll have listings from people that that are marketing their own buildings, and that can be fine. Just I encourage you to do whichever route you go, check out enough buildings that you start to get a sense yourself of, this is kind of what that particular space should be going for. Here's, you'll develop a sense of that yourself. Brokers are a great resource. The brokers, most brokerages have a pretty good internal database that all their different brokers contribute to, and the bigger ones actually have staff that just spend time updating listings and updating the database all the time. And so they can be very helpful. The clearer you can be with them about what you need, the better the matches are going to be when they want to take you out on a tour. And again, some brokers will spend more time with you than others, and some brokers are better about focusing on what your needs are rather than just, brokers are transaction paid, right? So I understand. I actually still am a licensed broker. I just don't do much stuff other than for my partners and I. But the when you're paid on commission, the push, the financial incentive is to get deals done quickly and move on. That's not always what's in the best interest of the tenant. So the tenant has to gauge, is this broker taking care of me, or are they just kind of rushing through the process to get me to sign something so they can send a bill? And you're all business people. You have a good sense of that. You probably deal with lots of different people and vendors all the time. So use your gut sense. Use your sense of how these people how they interact with you. Timelines are important because some spaces might not be available when you need it, or sometimes you get landlords that want a longer lease commitment than you're willing to do. The timelines are neat. Again, it all comes back to what your expectation is for how your business is going to roll forward, so that you can have it tied. So you can have a transaction that's tied to that matches as good as possible. Because obviously our plans are always changing, but you want it as aligned as close as possible to what your plans are for your business. Lease versus, if you've been around for a while and you've got cash to invest or the capacity to do that, a lot of times owning your building is a decent option, especially if you're in a business that's fairly stable, or if the growth is going to occur by satellites and your main facility is going to be fairly stable. A lot of times owning your own building over the long term pays off, because your mortgage payment is, in today's world, probably could be even less than what your basic rent payment is, because interest rates have been so low. But you've got to write a check for 10 to, well, if it's an SBA loan, maybe only 10%. If it's a normal commercial loan, maybe 20 or 25% to as a down payment. Anyway, it's something to think about. The logical time to think about it is about 12 months before the end of your current lease, because that gives you enough time to kind of see if that's one of the options. And you can look at the purchase option concurrent with the leasing option, so that way you've got a fallback, so you don't get stuck in a corner because you've gotten too enamored with one particular solution over another. Um, yeah, so that's keep that in mind if your business is in that position. For restaurants, it's particularly great if you can get a building, because if you're a successful restaurant operator, basically your success is the leverage the landlord has over you to make you pay more rent, because they know that you really can't afford to, you really can't relocate. I mean, it's very, very challenging. So it's a delicate balance you have to walk with the landlord. The landlord also wants you to still stay there, right? So they don't want to put the rent so high that you go out of business, or 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 feel like you're forced to move. So the proposals that you're going to get, they're going to be all over the map. You're going to have some people that it's like a straight rent. Some rents are going to have escalators in them. Some are going to have CPI. Some are going to say, well, I'll give you, I really want a higher rent number, face rent, but I'll give you some free rent up front, maybe even outside the lease, so the lender doesn't notice it. I mean, they'll never say that, but that's the point. And so then you have to look at, well, given all those different options, how does that work for you? How does that work for your business? Um, so there's a lot of variation on how the rent structure is. Don't forget to push hard on getting good information on the pass-through costs. The vast majority of leases in today's world, you're going to have a base rent, but then you're going to have operating costs pass through. So taxes, insurance, utilities, grounds maintenance, elevator maintenance, all those things get passed through. Some leases even have pass-throughs on long-term capital items like residing, new roofs, new sidewalks, new water service to the building. So you have to really read your lease closely, because I've seen some landlords that put that in there, and usually they say, "Oh, don't worry about it. That's a once every 20-year thing." Well, maybe, but what if something happens in it that, and you're in the space and you're going to be have a pro rata share of that. So anyway, just understand that that's an issue. But the normal operating costs they can provide, because they can show you for that space what was last year's, what's the projected budget for this year. And you need to think about that, because it's not uncommon for those pass-through expenses to be 50 or 60% of what your base rent is. So basically, you think you're paying 12 bucks a foot, and you're really going to be paying 18 bucks a foot by the time the dust settles. Um, it messes your budget up pretty bad if you don't take that into account. Concessions, right now, the market is really strange. There's some kinds of space that you can get concessions because they've had spaces that have been sitting vacant for a while. And there are other spaces that, like distribution space right now, is crazy. There's like waiting lines for it. So it's one of the weirdest markets I've seen, and I've been around in the real estate world for a long time. There are distribution spaces right now that are leasing for more money per foot than the nice office buildings that are vacant down in Renton, right? I mean, it's crazy, because office building costs probably 3 times as much to build. But if it's vacant, market drives the lease rates. So if you're in a if what you need for your business happens to be in one of those markets that's got the excess vacancy, don't be shy about asking for stuff that you want. Tenant improvements, maybe some free rent up front to help you with your transition, maybe moving costs, maybe a nice even if the space works pretty well for you, maybe you want, an upgraded carpet, or, more color variation in the paint, or, whatever it is. The worst they can do is say no. And if they have a lot of vacancy and you're a quality tenant, they're going to want you. So they're going to work hard you won't get everything, but you'll get more than if you don't ask. Some other things that aren't quite as important down here in South King County, but could be depending on where you're at. Sometimes there's parking costs. So, what's it going to cost your employees and your customers if they've got parking costs? Some jurisdictions have different tax structures for B&O. Maybe the labor market's a little different. If your options are all in South King County, your labor market probably isn't going to change a lot. But if you have a choice of being in Kent or being in Frederickson or being in Everett, you should take a look at what's the labor market like. Actually, all of those three are still in the Puget Sound, but so maybe a better comparison would be like, Central Washington to Kent or something. But think about that because it's going to impact your overall operating costs. So you want to think about all those pieces. I'm sharing a lot of information that is going to have different value to different tenants. If you're a 5-person shop, some of these things are probably going to be a little bit of overkill, but I would encourage you to at least give it a passing thought because especially the base rent and especially the pass-through costs, because those are the biggest numbers that are going to impact you financially, and the tenant improvements. Oh, I skipped over that bullet. Let me go back to tenant improvements. So if you need changes to the space, a lot of times the landlord will say something like, or the broker will say something like, well, you can get $15 a foot for tenant improvement allowance and that should cover it. It's like, no, don't take that at face value because it depends on what you want. If all you want is paint and carpet, that's one number. If you need some walls moved or if you need the HVAC, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning change, that's something. If you need a reconfiguration of a kitchen, those kinds of things, you can add up to a lot of money pretty quickly. So there's a cost component. There's also a timing component because your tenant improvements can trigger a whole bunch of things that, unfortunately, some tenants don't consider. Because you don't move very often, hopefully, and it's especially, I'll say, dangerous to somebody who's leasing for the first time and needs tenant improvements done. Because sometimes you'll talk to a contractor and you'll say, okay, I need this space reconfigured to be my restaurant. And the contractor will say, oh, well, I can do that in a couple of months. Well, what they mean is they can do the work in a couple of months. That's not your timeline, because your timeline is first you got to get it. First you have to get the site control. You have to get some sort of agreement with the landlord so that that you've got the ability to lease the space. Then you have to pay for design. You have to get the design done. Then you have to submit for permits. So that takes time, that takes money. And sometimes the permit people come back and say, well, what about this and this and this? Now you start the clock again. So then you got to resubmit the design. Once you get all that stuff done, then you can hire the contractor. And you can easily chew up 6 months just getting a relatively simple tenant improvement project done. And you can end up with a price point that's more than you expected if you don't pin down what you need and how much it's going to cost up front before you sign the lease. Because if you don't do that, then you're really exposed. Because once you sign the lease, you're on the hook. And even if the costs are way more than you expect, you're stuck. You either have to write the checks and deal with it, or you're in deep trouble because you've now signed this lease that you got to pay for. And sometimes people feel like I'm being overly dramatic, but I've seen people in a world of hurt over just this issue. So if you need very many TIs, please, please, please pay attention to those details. Take the extra time. The broker and the landlord are likely to be pushing on you saying, oh, I got another deal coming in. You better hurry up. Don't let them push you around. You need to hold your own as far as what you need for your space. And you need to really, really understand the timelines and the cost and who's going to do what. Some landlords, like if you lease from a regional landlord or a national landlord, they usually have contractors they've worked with, architects they've worked with, they understand the permitting process. And if you push on them, they'll usually give you pretty good timelines. I'd still confirm it with the contractor and with the architect and with the city, but they're going to be more realistic because they do it all the time. Where I see people get in the most trouble is usually with smaller landlords. They maybe haven't done any tenant improvements lately, or they really don't care, because if they can get you to sign the lease, it's not their problem at that point, it's your problem. And so they may not be realistic about what's involved. So you need to advocate for yourself, and you need to protect yourself in that part of the process. So when you're thinking about the spaces, there are a lot of non-financial stuff that's that's important too. We talked a little bit about the image and the branding. How do your customers perceive it? I actually helped a guy move from North Snohomish County up to Whatcom County up to Bellingham because in Snohomish County, well, he was in kind of North Snohomish County, he was having a hard time recruiting engineers, and it turned out that the engineers just didn't like that. They were having a hard time for the particular location. So he was kind of like, well, do I move closer to Seattle or do I move to Bellingham? Or he was trying to figure out where can he move. Not so, and it was really driven by recruiting. It was driven by where there were certain particular kinds of engineers that he needed to hire, and he had to have a location that would appeal to them. It wasn't about the salary. He was paying competitive salaries on a national scale because he was recruiting nationally. But it was really about what's the environment, both from a location standpoint, but and also an aesthetic standpoint. It was manufacturing, but it was a really nice looking manufacturing building. So that human resource piece is, and maybe even more so now. This was back in the day when nobody was talking about being able to hire people when I did that particular when I worked with that guy. But now, everybody's talking about it. So thinking about, how are your employees going to feel about it, not just your customers. Could be safety. I mean, I worked with a guy who had a small manufacturing company that was in South Seattle, and after the third shooting at the intersection next to the building, the employees were like, "We're not coming in anymore. This is just too scary." So, anyway, so think about how your employees are going to respond too. We talked a little bit about and
All right, everybody. So it looks like Kevin may be having some Wi-Fi issues on his end, but I will see if we can get him back. And if not, I can just go ahead and wrap up. And if anybody has any questions in regards to small business real estate and the like, or anything else for that matter, the Small Business Development Center is a wonderful place to go and check out. And I think he just popped back in, so I'm going to go ahead and add him back. Hi there.
I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, I saw two little swirly things on my screen.
Uh-oh. Well, I'm glad you're back. Did you want to pick up where you left off?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm not sure exactly where it cut out, but let's see. Share screen. Share screen.
Right.
Are we back?
We're back.
All right. Sorry about that.
All good.
Oh man, I usually have pretty good bandwidth at home, so my apologies. So I'm not sure where I was at. Was I talking about location or flex space, flexibility, or?
I believe so. Flexibility.
Okay. All right. So so from a landlord standpoint, the flexibility is hard because it constrains what they can do, but it's again, it comes back to our very first slide for you guys, which is, what do you need? What does your business need? And if flexibility is important, then push hard for it. And if it's not, then, it's something that you can concede and move on with other things. But it's worth thinking about. Location has a lot of implications that, we already talked about the HR issues. We talked about the branding issues. It also has it can have, depending on your business, a lot of operational issues. I have some clients that have field operations, so HVAC and landscaping and contractors and things like that. So where they're located has a lot of impact on how profitable they are, because they're paying people to be sitting in trucks, getting from the warehouse where the equipment and the materials are out to the contract sites, out in the field. And so, you might be able to pay half as much for rent by being out, I don't know, in, East Pierce County instead of being in Auburn, but you're going to pay, 4 times that in salary and cost and gas to get your people out there and back if your field locations are here. So anyway, you just think about what your cost structure is for your business, and if you have a lot of costs that are related to transportation and location, factor that in when you're looking at the space that you're looking at, not just the rent and not just the facility specific stuff, but what's the implication to your other operating costs. Freeways, arterials, transits, trails, all that stuff influences kind of how the space works for you. Again, both from a customer standpoint, from a staff access standpoint. For some businesses, where all the employees are out in the field all the time, the amenities and walkability part is probably non-issue. But if you have a company where the people, when they're in the office, they're there all day, right? So, I mean, if it's that kind of an operation, and so then all of a sudden, can you walk to a coffee shop? Can you walk to a restaurant? Does it feel like a safe neighborhood? Is it walkable to, a transit station? If people are, greeners and want to take the sounder every day, I mean, whatever it is. And so think about that, again, depending on your business, kind of who's in the office space and stuff. Because sometimes the amenities and walkability can be a valuable tool, both from a customer standpoint and from a HR standpoint, from an employee retention and recruitment standpoint. And so sometimes if you're paying a small premium on the lease, but it has just a really cool location, that it may be worth it too. I mean, it's worth at least thinking about in your decision-making process. Oops, here we go. There we go. So now you got all these pieces in mind. Now you get to negotiate, right? And you can use those financial and those non-financial tools that we just walked through to help you in analyzing, which of these options is going to work out best for you. It may be the least expensive option, or it may not, depending on what your balance is between the financial and the non-financial pieces are. What I encourage people to think about doing as a process is, pick the top couple, maybe the top 3, and then push hard on them to get, a fairly detailed proposal. And out of that, you can kind of get a sense of, well, who's really my preferred site, which is my preferred option. And then on the preferred one, you want to, especially if you need tenant improvements, you want to get some level of site control, letter of intent kind of thing, because you're going to have to start spending some money, or get the landlord to start spending some money on design, so that you can get your construction costs figured out and you can really pin down your timeline. But I encourage you to keep your mind open, because sometimes you can get down the road a ways on your preferred choice and something weird happens. The tenant next door decides that they want to expand, and I can almost guarantee that if the existing tenant is a good tenant and they want to expand and take that space over, they're going to get a priority over you. And until you have a lease actually signed, it's not a legal obligation on the landlord to rent that space to you. So keep fallback if you can. it really helps. It also really helps in the negotiations, because if there's something that's important to you, it's weird. It's like I swear the landlords have a second or a sixth sense about, if there's a weak spot, because if you don't have a fallback, you may say you want something, but if the landlord has a sense that you really want their space, they seem to, a lot of people are pretty good about just drawing the line, and it's harder for you to push back if you get really invested in that particular space, or if you don't feel like you have a fallback. I think, having a preference is natural, is good. I mean, you'll never, although if you look for the perfect space, chances are slim that'll happen. So I encourage people to have a timeline. Usually you'll have a timeline, because if you have a lease ticking away, you're going to be in a situation where you've got to do something, because your current lease is either going to have to be renewed, or you're going to have to move. Or if you stay put and you don't have a new lease negotiated, usually there's something called an acceleration clause in a lease that is going to increase your rent pretty dramatically if you just hold over and you don't have a new arrangement with the landlord. So take the time to be clear. Went over that a little bit a slide or two ago, but the tenant improvements and the operating expenses are the area that I've seen the most number of people get hit, and sometimes bad enough that it really puts their business at risk. So it's important to understand what those operating costs are. It's important to understand what your TI costs are. It's important to understand what the timelines are for the TIs, and I guess fundamentally know your numbers, right? What can your business really afford? If your rent's going to go up, but it adds value in some other way, maybe because it's, it gives you more space for more people, or maybe it's a better space, or maybe it supports your business better. That can be really great. If you're in a situation where you've been lucky and just didn't realize you were lucky, because maybe your rent was fixed and your rent's 3 or 4 years behind the times, and you're going to face a big uptick even if you stay put and don't change anything, then you really need to think about, well, how do I deal with that? What can my customers, can I get enough of a bump out of my revenue from my customers to cover that? How am I going to do that? What are my competitors doing? So even though it's just the lease, it really has an impact and a ripple impact on the rest of your business as far as how your business model works. So be sure you know your numbers and kind of how that flows back and forth. We talked a little bit about timelines earlier. I'm just emphasizing it again here. It takes you from the time you decide to look around at alternatives, even if it's just to develop information to use in a renegotiation because you want to stay put, but you think the landlord's asking too much money, and you need to have some data points to help them understand that you're actually willing to leave if they don't get real with you. But it takes time. The search takes time. If you are going to move, the negotiation takes time. The design takes time. Permitting takes time. Building takes time. So in order to have a credible fallback in your negotiations with the current landlord, if that's your preference, you need to start early enough that they understand that that's actually an option for you. Because if you start 3 or 4 months before the end of the lease, they know that there's no way you can do that. It's just not going to happen unless you have a super simple space needs. Then maybe it's possible, but you still have to find the space and negotiate it. And I mean, there's even the simple version takes months. And if you have something more complex, you really need to start early enough. And if you don't do that, the landlord knows what the timelines are because they're dealing with it. Well, it depends. I mean, maybe if it's a one building landlord, they don't, but most landlords know what the timelines are and know when you're past that point of no return. And oftentimes it'll show in how they respond to you and what they tell you they want. So pay attention to it. So once you get all those pieces pulled together, so you've got your financial agreement, you understand what your costs are going to be, you've got your TIs figured out, you got to document you need to make sure that the lease, so you don't have to, the landlord will provide the document because a lot of times the lender has to approve the lease document. But then the important, so the lease document's important, and of course what they put in it. You got to make sure that what you believe you agreed to, hopefully you've got like a letter of intent or something that's helped you in the from a written perspective as you've gone through the negotiations. And you want to make sure that that gets in your lease document. Unlike residential transactions, commercial leasing, you don't have any protection as the tenant, really. I mean, it's a commercial contract. Whatever you agree to is whatever you agree to. There's no landlord-tenant act defined. Oh, I'm sorry. TIs are tenant improvements. So walls, doors, carpet, anything that changes the space to work for you. Yeah, so tenant improvements. Sorry about that. I should have spelled that out. The landlord-tenant law that you hear about in the news often, it only applies to residential leasing. It doesn't protect small businesses. It doesn't protect business owners. You're seen in the eyes of the law as a competent, capable business person dealing with another competent, capable business person. So whatever you sign is presumed to be what you intended and agreed to. So you really need to you really need to read the document and understand it. And I strongly encourage people to use an attorney to help them go through it. You want an attorney that knows leases, however, because if the attorney's not familiar with leases, they can raise all sorts of issues that, yeah, they may not like it, but that's the market typical language, and you're just not going to get anybody who's not going to agree to that particular item. So, but if you get an attorney that looks at leases all the time, they're going to be able to explain to you why these things are in there and why, and what components of the document you might be able to negotiate and what you can't. And sometimes the landlord doesn't have much latitude, because if they have debt on the building, the lenders approve the lease document, and they're not going to go back to the lender for a change in the basic document. It just isn't likely to happen because it will take forever, for one thing. Let's see. So you want to make sure that the document reflects what you understood that you were agreeing to. Around the tenant improvements pieces, there's something called a work letter, which is basically a document that goes with that's part of the lease, and it describes Oh yeah, you want to vet the contract before you sign the contract. Absolutely. I don't know where that popped up from, but it's absolutely right. I didn't. So don't sign the contract until you understand the contract, because you're gonna live with it for 3 or 5 or 10 years. The work letter is a way of documenting what you've agreed to for the tenant improvements. So it'll have like who's going to, who's paying for the design, who gets to approve the design, who's going to hire the contractor, who's paying the contractor, who's managing the contractor, who gets to decide when the contractor's done it correctly or not. All those pieces are very important. And if the tenant improvements are fairly simple, it's not as high stress. But if you're having a lot of work, if you need a lot of work done to a space before you move in, you want to take enough time to get it right, because if you don't, it can be very expensive for you, and it can cost you time, which for some businesses, a delay in being able to move or an impact to your business can cost you more per day than the cost of the tenant improvement process. Let's see. So talked about the work letter. Attorneys are like I say, if you want. So if your attorney is kind of a general business attorney and doesn't do a lot of real estate work or doesn't do a lot of lease reviews, ask them for some, for a referral, because they're usually pretty good about, if they understand their expertise, so they usually have people that they are comfortable with that they can connect you with to be able to do that. If the lease is going to involve major tenant improvements, and especially if you're going to pay for a bunch of them, I would get your accountant in the loop, because there are ways that you can do it that are more beneficial to you than other ways from a tax standpoint, as far as how you can write those improvements off, how you can expense them. So Yeah, if you so talking with your accountant about the transaction could be is often helpful too. Um, there's some non-financial stuff that's very important in the lease that you want to understand. Probably the most common ones are the your ability to assign the lease and your obligations as a guarantor on the lease or as a personal signer on the lease. And the assignment piece is if you have a business and you're thinking, well, I'm going to sign a five-year lease, but sometime in the next 5 years, maybe I want to retire, maybe I want to sell, maybe I want to sell to my employees, or maybe I want to sell to somebody outside. And the lease often will have language in there about assignment that's going to set the terms in place for how that can happen, or in some cases can't happen. It's not unusual for the landlord to have the right to accept or reject the assignment of the lease. And so then, and even if they allow the assignment, sometimes you're still on the hook for the guarantee through the end of the initial term. So just be aware of that if that's part of what might be in the cards for you and your business. The guarantee is, so a lot of times you'll sign personally, even though your business name is on the front page, and it's, you just need to be aware of that. And a lot of landlords make it even clearer than that because I'll actually have a separate guarantee document that could be 2 to 4 pages that basically says, it's a long-winded version of saying you're on the hook for this no matter what. If the business goes away, too bad, you're still got to pay the rent. There is some offset because if you go out, the landlord has an obligation to try to lease the space. Um, but if they have other vacancies, they don't have an obligation to lease your space before the other space. So anyway, it's just something to be aware of, not something to scare you from, moving your business forward, but just be aware. I mean, business is just a series of risk assessment and risk mitigation, right? That's kind of the way I look at it anyway. Um, So you're, we talked about this already. I forgot it was on this slide too. So the guarantee or the personal signature, it's just like when you sign a credit line. Most small businesses, I mean, I've seen some companies that are 20 years old and doing 20 million in business, and the owner still has to sign on the credit line rules. So I personally think sometimes they should negotiate harder with their banks, but it's really typical for financial obligations for small business owners to fall on them personally. Um, and a lease is like that in probably 90 or maybe even 95% of the cases. We talked about landlord tenant laws not protecting commercial tenants. We've talked a lot about TIs because that's what I worry about because I've seen too many people get hurt by not spending enough attention thinking about their tenant improvement issues. So you get through all that, you're ready to go and you're comfortable with the lease and you understand what the exposure is. Now you get to sign, and then especially if there's tenant improvements, then the work then the next step of the work begins because then all that other stuff has to happen before you can actually move in. And even if you have fairly simple improvements to the space, there's still a ton of work if you're going to move, right? You got to figure out the moving, and you got to figure out the files, and you've got to figure out the new server, and you've got to figure out, all your marketing material changes in your website updates and like all that stuff. So again, timing is important. Think early, put together a good list. A lot of times the brokers will have generic lists that are good at helping you, or Taryn and I have good lists that we can provide, if you want some help on that. Just things to trigger your thinking about the things that you need to do to prepare for as smooth a move as possible. Um, let's see. All those pieces, treat it like a project, right? What are the to-dos? Who's going to be responsible? When should they get done? What's the budget for it? Because a lot of this stuff takes money. And so, then just treat it like a project management project, right? Here's my goal. Here's the steps I need to go through. Here's who's going to do it. Here's the money. Here's how I track it, right? Treat it like a project because it is. And then you get to go and make sure that the space is right and move in. And then I really encourage people to celebrate because it's a big project to move. Even a modest space takes a lot of energy, a lot of emotional energy, a lot of actual energy, a lot of coordination, and you deserve to celebrate. Your employees will appreciate it because a lot of times they're stressed out about it, even if they don't tell you. use it as a marketing opportunity, right? Invite your customers in to see your cool new space. Um, use it as an excuse to invite your favorite vendors and contractor, people that you do business with. So use it. You go through a lot of effort to do a lease process or buy a building, and when you're finally able to move in and function, celebrate it, because you deserve to do that, and the people around you will appreciate it and they'll have fun. Let's see. I've got 7 minutes left, so this would be 6 minutes left, I guess. Um, uh, what questions? I'm not used to this format. I'm used to Zoom where I can kind of see the little screen people. So if you have questions or comments or stuff, I guess you can put it in the comments box here, because somebody asked me a question about tenant improvements when I was using TIs. I apologize. I try not to use too much slang. But if you have some questions, or even specific questions, I'm happy to answer that. And while you're thinking about that, I'll remind you that the Small Business Center at Green River is no cost service. We can help you with a wide range of stuff. We've got Taryn and I that are kind of generalists, and we can connect you to lots of resources of our peers around the state. We've also got a guy named Daryl Sandell who does helps people with government contracting. He's a niche focused guy. He's very good at helping people with registration. If you want to be a small business certified or women owned or veteran owned or minority owned or, all those kinds of things, he can help walk you through that. He can help you understand how to get on like the vendor list for the cities, or be a subcontractor for one of the really large general contractors. A lot of times, like Sound Transit, right? They'll hire some really big contractor to do the project. Well, those contractors may not be veteran owned or women owned or minority owned or any of those other things, but they have targets of subcontracting for those pieces. So, if you're, and part of it is just small business, right? So just being a small business checks some of their boxes. So, maybe you can provide security services, or maybe you can, I don't know. I mean, you know your business. Anyway, for some people, it's an opportunity. The other thing we have access to is exporting. So if you have a product or even services, I know an engineering company that's doing some work overseas now. They didn't even really think about it, but they have a very particular niche expertise, and they realize that some of their competitors are doing work for overseas companies, and so I connected them with our export person out of Seattle, and they're now doing some of their business overseas. So we can help with all sorts of stuff. All right, well, I hope I didn't overdo you. I hope that you found it useful, and I hope there were enough pieces in there that were good key takeaways for you to help you be more confident in your process as you go through your lease renewal or your new lease. And if you're interested in the purchase alternative piece, give Taryn or I a call and or drop us an email. And we're at the Green River Small Business Center. Actually, I think our website and email address is in the last Kent Chamber newsletter. And if it's not, I'll make sure that Liza's got it. She can send it out to people. And because we're available, I mean, you already pay for us in a sense, because it's tax dollars that pay for us to be able to provide the services. So take advantage of us. We're here to help you. Let's see, what do I have here? Oh yeah, so.
Alrighty. Well, thank you for that, Kevin. I appreciate it. I was just actually looking for the link to your website to put in the comments for everybody, so that they have it if they want to reach out to you, and it's also there in your slides. So we are more than prepared. But yeah, so and I wanted to make a comment. I really appreciate that you address the celebration piece. I think that with all of the steps that it takes to get a space, we might forget about that part.
I think it's important because it's a lot of work to do that, to go through this process, and it's on top of everything else you're already doing as a small business owner.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's good to, kind of put that effort in, for ourselves to be able to celebrate and
Well,
really
and actually, you're with it. So that's a good point because the Kent Chamber actually is
good
really
segue.
good about turning. Oh, well, maybe that's where you were headed. I don't mean to steal your thunder.
All good.
Kent
No,
Chamber does
well,
great open houses. So, I mean, they're
yeah,
good at turning out the troops to welcome to help with your celebration.
yeah, that's the idea. We're always around to help out with those grand openings if you want, us to support you in your celebration. If any businesses out there are looking for a ribbon cutting, we even, have the big scissors that you see on TV. We have big red ribbon and everything. So.
Terrific.
Yeah. Well, so I, really appreciate you getting on here with us today. We're really grateful that we have Green River and the Small Business Center as members and as investors, in fact. And just glad that we, have you guys as a resource to be able to help out our members. Like we've already said, if anybody has any questions for Kevin about, this topic or even a different subject, we are more than happy to connect you. Um, and if anybody out there has any thoughts on some events or some workshops that you'd like to see, you're more than welcome to send us an email at any time. info@kentchamber.com is a great way to reach us. And then just a couple of small housekeeping things from our end while we still have you on the live here. We actually do have a ribbon cutting coming up on March 1st, and you can see more about that on our website. It's with Seattle 3D Ultrasound. They're new in town. But then our luncheon coming up, the March luncheon is on March 11th at 11 a.m. It's with Mayor Dana Ralph, and she's going to give her State of the City, but a business edition. And that is actually at Green River's Kent campus, a little lunchtime event there. And then later in March, we're going to be hosting a women's summit, and it's about women's wellness in the workplace. And you'll be able to find out the more details as we gather them on our website as well. So that's all for me. So I really appreciate you being with us again, Kevin, and hopefully everybody watching will see you next month for our next workshop.
Good. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank,
the opportunity.
thank you.